Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. You all know Teddy. He's joining me at least for the beginning of this Friday Reads video, where we will catch up on the weekend reading, talk about any exciting book things that have happened during the week, and all of that type of thing. If you'd like to skip to the Friday Reads portion of the video, you may do so with the timestamp that will be in the description box down below. I finished 2 books this week. I have another DNF for 2024, and I am about halfway through another book. We will talk about all of that when we get to the actual Friday Reads portion of the video. I'm going to let Teddy sit freely in my lap. So the first thing I should mention is that we are coming up on 1 year with Teddy. October 1st will be the anniversary of Teddy coming to live with us. I can't believe it's only been a year. He fits in so well with Joel and I that it just feels like he's been with us forever, and we are so delighted to have him in our lives. He's a joy. You're a joy. And I know a lot of other people have been so excited to have him around in Friday Reads, and his appearances in Friday Reads videos have been a little spotty over the summer because he's been having fun doing other things and just, being an active dog. But he is a joy, and I'm glad that so many people have enjoyed having him around as well, because he's a delight who is really loving these ear scratches right now. I should also note that right before I started filming, someone who lives across the street started mowing their lawn, and I hope you can't hear it, but this is the window that I have to film a Friday Reads video for this week, so we are going to have to go with it, and it just is what it is. The other thing to mention, I should also mention that unfortunately, we are not going to be here on October 1st. We're going to be in Portland, as I mentioned in my last Friday Reads video, which will be linked down below, because Joel and I are going to a book thing in Portland, and that's going to be a lot of fun, but unfortunately, we will not be with him. So then I thought to myself, well, if we're not going to be here on October 1st, what was the day that we were contacted about Teddy by a Welsh Terrier rescue organization? And it was September 27th, which is the day that the day after the day I'm filming this. I'm filming this on Thursday because Friday is the day we leave, which means we can't celebrate with him on the day we found out about him either. So we're just going to have a party when we get home, aren't we, Teddy? And that's kind of the way it's going to be. So obviously I'm filming this on Thursday because I need to get to the airport and fly to Portland on the Friday. My usual MO is to film a Friday Reads on Friday and then post it on Saturday. So I'm doing it a day early this week to accommodate that. I'm going to try to film another video. The armrest on the seat moved a little bit and startled Teddy. I'm going to try to film another video today that I can schedule for Monday. The week has really gotten away from me, as you can see. So I don't know if I'm going to manage to do that, but I will try. So hopefully you will have a video on Monday. It should be fun. If I don't manage to film the video for Monday, I do plan to film when I get home. So you'll probably have something either Thursday or Friday, probably more likely Friday, because we get home on Wednesday and it's going to be a whole thing. So you're more likely, hopefully you'll have another video from me on Monday, and then maybe Friday, let's say, you'll have another one, and then we'll have Friday Reads again. And we will just go from there. That's sort of the plan. Really excited to go to Portland. And another thing I wanted to mention is a thank you to people who follow, because basically every video that I have been posting for about a year now, I have been including affiliate links from bookshop.org in the description box. So you can follow those links to find out more about the books that I talk about, or if I spark an interest in them, you can use those links and purchase the books. And if you use those links, or the bookshop sort of storefront thing that they set up for me, it gives me a little bit of a kickback. And the thank you is that for everyone who has used those links, I was able to cash in some of the money that I had accrued from Bookshop before Joel and I went to Ireland and Scotland earlier this year. And that sort of paid for some of our bookstore visits. And I was able to cash in again some of the money, or all of the money that had accrued since I cashed it in for the Ireland trip. And that's going to pay for our trip to Powell's, essentially. So just a heartfelt thank you to everyone who has used the links or anything like that. Also, if you use like super thanks here on YouTube, that is something that traditionally, when I get revenue from YouTube every month, we put that into a special account, like a savings thing, and that also contributes to like book shopping and things like that. So thank you. It really means a lot. And super thanks is part of the revenue that comes from YouTube. So if you've watched an ad, thank you. You are supporting my book addiction. If you have used super thanks, thank you. You are supporting my book addiction. And if you have used those affiliate links, thank you. You are supporting my book addiction. And I really appreciate that, because obviously it means a great deal to me. And I think it means a great deal to Teddy, because, you know, having that extra source of money to spend on books means that I don't have to take away from money that would be spent on treats for him. Right, Teddy? Is that right? So I think that's about it. Well, there is one more thing. The National Book Award will be announcing its shortlists on October 1st. I'm going to be in Portland, so I'm hoping that that video I film when I get back is going to be a reaction to the shortlist for the National Book Award for fiction. Maybe I will finally be able to have looked at the other long lists and short lists, because they will have been announced as well, and I'll sort of fold them into my shortlist reaction. Oh, and also a thank you to everybody who was really concerned about our friend. I had mentioned in my last Friday Reads that we have a friend who has been having a health crisis, and that was very stressful last week. It has continued to be very stressful this week, mostly because there are still a lot of unknowns. I don't really want to get into it, but it has taken up a lot of time and energy and stress for us and for our friend and for the other friends we have in town who have also been helping out with her and trying to get everything settled. So I really appreciate all of the support about that, but it did kind of impact my reading week again. And we'll talk about that in the Friday Reads portion of the video. I just really wanted to say thank you, because everybody was very nice. I have still fallen behind on comments because so much of my week has been consumed in working, taking care of Teddy, running out in the evenings to help with our friend, and it's been a busy week. So that's kind of where we are at with that, and hopefully good thoughts. We'll see. But let's jump to the actual Friday Reads portion of the video. As I said, I have finished 2 books. I DNF'd 2 books. I finished 2 books, DNF'd 1 book, and I am about halfway through another one. And I'm really surprised by the DNF. So let's start talking about those. The first book that I finished will not surprise you at all if you saw my last Friday Reads video, because I was reading Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. The reason I had been so interested in this book was that back in July, Joel and I both read Just for the Summer, which is Abby Jimenez's newest book, although she has one coming out next year. And I hadn't realized when I read Just for the Summer that it is the 3rd book in a series, and I don't think you need to have read the first 2 books, because obviously both Joel and I really enjoyed Just for the Summer without having experienced the first 2 books in the series. And it is actually a very interesting experience to have read this one first and then gone back to Part of Your World, because there is something that if you have read the previous books in the series, you'll see it coming in Just for the Summer, but if you haven't read the previous books, it functions as a sort of plot twist in Just for the Summer, and I kind of enjoyed that experience of it. So I have enjoyed starting with Just for the Summer and then going back and seeing the sort of background for that twist. So essentially, in Part of Your World, you have characters named Alexis and Daniel, and Alexis has this very moneyed, influential family in Minneapolis. They are important people within the hospital system that factors into Just for the Summer. Emma comes to Minneapolis just for the summer to work a temporary shift as a nurse at this medical center. And Alexis is sort of dealing with a lot of emotional abuse. She has left a relationship that was really harming her mentally and emotionally. And she is starting to struggle with her relationship with her family in a lot of ways. And Daniel lives in a small town outside of Minneapolis. She ends up meeting him because her car breaks down in the town, and he helps her. And they end up having a one-night stand, and they have a very solid flirtation. Abby Jimenez is very good at flirtations. And they have this cute relationship, and she starts to question what is important to her, and Daniel starts to question what is important to him, and that's a really interesting thing. I talked a lot last week about how I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people can get very snobby about genre books and about romance in particular, because both of the Abby Jimenez books that I have read at this point have helped me either learn something about myself, or they have helped me process things about my own family and my own history. And you can get that from anything. And if you want to be judgmental about romance books, do you? I have gotten a lot out of both of them, and I can't wait to read more. I had also mentioned last week that I think Abby Jimenez's book that is coming out next year will not be connected, and I was wrong. You actually meet the character who will be the protagonist of the next book, which is called Say You'll Remember Me, in Just for the Summer, in a very small part. So it will be interesting to see how much it connects to the other books in the series, because Just for the Summer and Part of Your World are pretty heavily connected, and the protagonist of the second book in the series, yours truly, is a supporting character in Part of Your World. She's the sort of best friend character. And I am so invested in this world. I can't wait to read Yours Truly, which is the second book. I am going to give it a little time. I might do it before the end of the year, but I think I liked having a little bit of a break. I read Just for the Summer in July, and then in September I read Part of Your World, obviously. So I think I'll probably give it anywhere from 2 to 5 months and then revisit. I am not someone who likes to binge a lot of things, but I have been enjoying this world so consistently that I will very likely be coming back for more, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, another delightful book from Abby Jimenez. Can't wait to read more of her books in the future. The next book that I finished was another shorty that I did for Shorty September, Olivia by Dorothy Strachey. This was, I had a very hard time last week choosing a book because of the stress around everything that was going on with our friend. And eventually I was looking for shorties because, Shorty September, and this is a very short shorty. It's, I think, exactly 100 pages. And I thought to myself, okay, lesbian intrigue with like gothic kind of vibes. That just sounds like something that I would be into right now. And I was. There are a lot of shorties that I think are perfect and concise and brilliant. And I am more impressed with a concise book that packs a powerful punch than I am with a really large, expansive book, at least lately. That's kind of the mode that I have been in with reading recently. And this is one of the rare cases where I feel like the story needed another 50 to 100 pages to sort of pad out a lot of things. And it's interesting because there is an emotional connection to this book and to the book that I DNF'd this week, in that this was sort of inspired in part by things that the author saw when she was in a boarding school. Dorothy Strachey is a pseudonym that the author used in order to publish a book that sort of had these lesbian elements. And it's a little about betrayal in this boarding school. So you have the protagonist, who is obviously named Olivia. She has been going to a boarding school in England, close to where her family lives. But now at age 16, she is sent to a boarding school outside of Paris. And while there, she becomes obsessed with one of the two headmistresses of the school, one of the main teachers who operates the school, named Julie. And this obsession, the way that Jacket describes it, leads to tragedy. And I feel like I needed more. The book takes some shortcuts to Olivia's obsession with Julie. It takes a lot of shortcuts. It feels very tepid in depicting the relationship between Olivia and Julie. And part of that, of course, is probably there's a big age difference between Olivia and Julie, especially with Olivia being 16 at the time that this is taking place. But it feels tepid in a way that doesn't necessarily serve the story. It feels a little more broad strokes than I would have liked. And it also makes it hard to believe the obsession and how deep it is and whether or not it would last. Although when you are in the throes of a powerful obsession, particularly a powerful romantic obsession, it doesn't really matter how short it is, doesn't really matter. if it wasn't destined to last, it still has power. But I definitely feel like I needed about another 50 to 100 pages to flesh out some of the details a little more, and ultimately what the impact of this obsession had. The introduction is written by Andre Osman, who had written Call Me By Your Name. He pretty specifically says that this story of romantic obsession inspired Call Me By Your Name, and I can see the roots of that. I do think if you are someone who is a big Jane Eyre fan, perhaps a Rebecca fan, because I haven't read Rebecca yet, so I can't say with authority, but I feel like if you are fans of either of those, you would probably like Olivia by Dorothy Strachey. But I do feel like I have to give that sort of caveat that it did feel like a shorty that could have used a little more substance. It's the only shorty I've read this month that I feel like I would say I actually wanted it to be longer in order to flesh out the story more. So I really liked it. I'm glad I finally got around to reading it, but I was just a little unsatisfied, although it did hit all of the things that I sort of needed it to hit in this moment. And for that reason, it was a success. Now let's talk about the DNF, because when I finished Part of Your World, I tore through Part of Your World. I listened to a good chunk of it on Friday, and then I think on Saturday or Sunday I was done. So I just tore through the last part of that book. And then I decided that I was going to start Desert Echoes by Abdi Nazemian. Now, I am a huge Abdi Nazemian fan, even though I've only read 2 of his books. I'm trying to one-handed move stuff around because I put my pile out of order. So I first read Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian, which is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book about a trio of friends in 1980s New York City dealing with issues of coming out and empowerment and the AIDS epidemic. And it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. And then I read Only This Beautiful Moment last year, which again, really beautiful book about 3 generations of an Iranian family dealing with issues of queerness and revolution, and just wonderful, beautiful, astute observations. So Abdi Nazemian had become this sort of must-read author for me. So when I heard that he had a book called Desert Echoes coming out, I was really excited. I will say, I think Teddy wants down, so I'm going to let him go. But I will say that when I read the plot description for Desert Echoes, now that I have a second hand, I can navigate this all a lot better. It didn't sound to me like a love story and like Only This Beautiful Moment, because both of these books deal with issues of like Iranian identity, revolution, activism, and generational family issues and connection with your family or friends or friend group or chosen family and those things. They feel very linked, even though the plots are very different and they don't feel same. But then you read the description of Desert Echoes and it doesn't sound like it fits with these, which was interesting because when an author departs from their usual MO, it's interesting. Like, an author doesn't have to keep writing similar themes in all of their books. It can be very fascinating when they break out of that and do something a little bit different. But part of me was thinking, oh, it also doesn't sound as interesting as these 2 books. So I was a little hesitant, even though I figured, I've loved these 2 books so much that I trust where Abdi Nazemian will go. Plus, Joel read The Chandler Legacies, which is an older book of Abdi Nazemian's, and he really liked that book as well. So, Desert Echoes is the story of Cam, who's an Iranian boy who is grieving and kind of like Olivia, has an obsession with his first romance. But her first romance was not a teacher. It was another high school kid named Ash. Cam only dated Ash for a few months. And again, in the way of obsession, in the way of your first romantic feelings, the length of the relationship doesn't necessarily matter because obsession is obsession. And your first romantic love tends to be sort of like obsession, something you really can't let go of. And Ash disappeared in Joshua Tree, and they haven't found a body. So they don't know if he's alive or dead, or if they should hold out hope that he will be found, or if they should hold out hope that the remains will be found, or anything like that. And in the time since this disappearance, Cam had been with him in Joshua Tree, but he has no memory of what happened that night, which is a bit of a convenient thing. So he is obsessed and he can't let this issue go. And people are trying to encourage him to move on. There's a sort of best friend figure named Bodhi who wasn't a big fan of Ash in the first place. And honestly, jumping ahead to my critiques of it, I really did not like Bodhi. I really did not like Ash. And I wasn't too sure I liked Cam either as I was reading this book and listening to it. And basically, Cam is given an opportunity to go back to Joshua Tree, and in that opportunity, he wants to see if he can get to the bottom of what happened to Ash and see if he can find him, because he is sort of hoping that Ash is still alive out there somewhere. But as I said, I just really wasn't responding to any of the characters, and I was having a very hard time with this story because I didn't really understand the relationship between Ash and Cam. There was something that was predictable about the relationship between Cam and Bodhi, and not to get into any spoilers. Now, I did DNF this book. The reason I know what happens in the end is that Joel happened, well, he didn't happen. We sort of planned this. We were reading it at the same time. We were both listening to it on audio. And he was traveling this week, so he got a little further than me. And the day we both started it, at the end of the day, we were on the phone together, and he was like, "So, did you start Desert Echoes?" And I said, "Yeah." "Did you?" And he said, "Yeah." And we figured out what part we were both at. And he's like, "So what do you think of it?" And I was like, "I'm not sure I like it." And he said, "Me too." But he was further along than me, and because he was traveling for work, he managed to get a lot of it in. So he actually finished the book yesterday, Wednesday. And at that point, I was not enjoying it enough, and with the stress of everything else going on, I had sort of taken a day to... I was actively choosing not to listen to Desert Echoes. I was choosing to listen to old episodes of a podcast called Maintenance Phase. So a lot of the time, I have found if I start getting anxious, I fall back into listening to old podcasts that are almost like comfort for me. Like historically, it's been a podcast called Two Dope Queens, which is a comedy podcast. Then last year, when I was feeling really anxious about something, I went back and I listened to like every episode of a podcast called You're Wrong About that I absolutely love. And now this year, this week, I started going back and listening to episodes of a podcast called Maintenance Phase, which is actually co-hosted by someone who used to co-host the podcast You're Wrong About. So it's like it's like a Marvel Cinematic Universe of my anxiety, where everything just ties into itself. But so I was actively choosing to listen to old episodes of Maintenance Phase rather than continue reading Desert Echoes, which I feel like is very illustrative of how little I was into the book. But I wanted to keep going because Abdi Nazemian had this run of success. Like both Like a Love Story and Only This Beautiful Moment had been among my top favorite books in the year that I read them. And it just felt like, given that, how could I give up on one of his books, even if I'm not enjoying it? I need to see it through to the end. Maybe there will be something in the end that will sort of tie all of this together. And I just was sort of struggling. It felt like I reached a point where I was thinking to myself, if this was any author other than Abdi Nazemian, I would just give up on the book because I'm not into it. The only reason I feel like I owe it to something to finish is because it's an author that I've enjoyed in the past. And that's sort of silly. Well, I happened to know that someone who subscribes to my channel, Kurt Anderson, was also listening to Desert Echoes, and we had a conversation, and he was not enjoying it either. And then both he and Joel finished it yesterday, and they had a whole conversation on Instagram about it. And when Joel got home last night, he was telling me that he had felt dissatisfied, and Joel knows me really well. He said, obviously, but he said to me, "I don't know if you're going to like this." And I think at that point I had told him, it's like, I feel like if this was any author other than Abdi Nazemian, I would just give up. And he said, "I don't think it's going to pay off to finish the book." And from his conversation with Kurt Anderson, it sounded like the same thing. So I decided to give up, and that just feels disappointing. The reason I say there's a sort of shared element between Desert Echoes and Olivia is that Olivia was written, or at least in part inspired, by experiences that the author had in a boarding school. And, obviously it's a fictionalized version. I don't know enough about the author to know how much of it is fictionalized and how much of it is true. But it sort of felt like Desert Echoes must be a very personal story for Abdi Nazemian. And that's probably why it feels so different from Only This Beautiful Moment and Like a Love Story, because these are books that are more like what he's actually writing, and Desert Echoes has an almost therapy sort of vibe. And that can be good. Go Tell It on the Mountain is the book that James Baldwin said he needed to write first because he needed to get all of these issues with his family and his coming of age and coming out of the closet. He needed to sort of exercise those from his soul through writing in order to move on and write other stories. And Go Tell It on the Mountain is a very compelling example of a writer using something that they have been through to create great art. It's not something that always lands. So one of the books that I had, or not one of the books, but the book I had read of Yi Yoon Lee before this year, and before Yi Yoon Lee became a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, was a book that felt like a therapy exercise where she was writing stories coping with the grief of losing a child. And it seems harsh to say this about such a personal and traumatic topic, but exercises in therapy don't necessarily work in fiction. I'm sure they are very useful for the author, but then when somebody else reads them, it loses something in that translation. I might not have as much feel for this story. It doesn't mean as much to me as it does to the author. And I think Desert Echoes falls into that trap based on what I had experienced in the part of it that I read, based on what Joel said after he finished, and based on what Kurt Anderson said. And the fact that Kurt Anderson usually has very similar taste in books to me, Joel has very similar taste in books to me, the fact that two people who are like reliable indicators of whether or not I will like a book disliked this so strongly, said to me that this was something that was worth kind of letting go and leaving behind. So that is what ended up happening with my DNF this week. It took me a long time to start another book after I read Olivia. Again, it took like 2 or 3 days because I kind of knew that it was going to be Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle because I got this from the library and because I'm on a time crunch. I sort of want to have this finished before we leave for Portland, but I'm only halfway through. So I don't know if I'm going to manage it, but it's not due until after we get back from Portland anyway. So I will have a little time, but I just kind of want to finish it before we go. It does read very quickly. Now, Headshot was on the New York Times Best Books of 2024 so far in June. It was then longlisted for the Booker Prize. And when it was longlisted for the Booker Prize, a lot of people read it because a lot of people were reading through the long list. And this revealed itself to be one of the most cilantro books on the Booker Prize long list. And because people get confused when I say it's a cilantro book, cilantro is something that some people like, but some people have this, I don't know if they have an enzyme or they lack an enzyme, but it makes cilantro taste like soap to them, so they just can't stand it. So it's a way of saying a Marmite book or something that is love it or hate it. I would say I think Headshot, although Orbital was very cilantro as well, but I would say Headshot was probably the most cilantro book on the Booker Prize long list, and ultimately it didn't end up making it onto the short list. I can see why people have had visceral negative reactions to this book because there are aspects of the way this story is told that could easily turn somebody off. Now, this is framed as a boxing tournament among teenage girls. And in the beginning, there are like tournament brackets, and each I don't know if do you call these linked stories or are they just chapters? It's a little vague, but however you want to define this book, if you want to define it as linked stories or if you want to define it as chapters, each is one bout. So we start with this one, then we go into this one and this one and this one, and then in the next part of the book, you'll have the next round, and then I assume you'll have the finale, and you're sort of working your way through. There's a lot of repetition. Some of the description is a little weird. I have heard people be turned off by the fact that Rita Bullwinkle has a tendency to say characters' full names a lot. So in the first matchup, you have Artemis Victor versus Andy Taylor, and she does say Artemis, she does say Andy, but most of the time she says their full names, like Artemis Victor and Andy Taylor. And I can see how somebody would be annoyed by that. There are also a lot of descriptions of bodies and body parts that use food in weird ways. And here I kind of left a bookmark on this page because I think this is an example of the writing that would easily turn someone off. So in the section about Izzy Lang and Iggy Lang, who are cousins who end up fighting in the first round. It says this: Iggy has always had a purple stain on and above her lip. And I think most people, as writers, would simplify that sentence. They would just say, Iggy has always had a purple stain on and above her upper lip. They would just say that. But that's not what Rita Bullwinkle does. It's a stylistic decision. She says, Iggy has always had a purple stain on and above her lip. So it just makes the sentence more complicated than it needs to be. And if that turns you off, you are not going to get along with Headshot, because she does things like that a great deal. And like I said, there are descriptions of body parts and bodies that use food in weird ways. Like one of the competitors, I believe the description, I didn't bookmark it, is that her legs look like dry pasta with skin over them. And again, it's kind of visceral, which makes sense because this is a book about teenagers engaging in a boxing competition. But it's also a little, I don't know, it feels a little gross. So if that turns you off or you just don't like it, you are not going to get along well with this book. And then I think it was even on the next page. There's a sort of example. It was not on the next page, but I found it. Izzy's mother had walked into the room, crawled under the motel plastic topper, turned away from Iggy and Izzy, toward the wall, and gone to sleep. The plastic topper had plastic decorative stitching. So already we're seeing plastic as just being repeated and repeated and repeated. The pattern printed on the topper was a grainy computer graphic of a brown paisley. It looked like someone had searched for a paisley print online and then blown it up to the size of the bed. Izzy's mother looked like she was sleeping under a cheaply printed plastic poster. Izzy's mother's body looked like a plastic baggie filled with water. Izzy thought her mother's chin looked like chicken. The thought of having a body like that, of having a thin permed head of hair and a cookie dough neck, seemed impossible to Izzy. So right there, you can sort of see the repetition because plastic starts coming up again and again and again. It's almost like a fixation. And the comparison of bodies to food, first in like a plastic bag full of water, the chin looked like a chicken and the cookie dough neck. So if all of these things turn you off, I can see how some people would say the repetition feels like boxing in a way. It's sort of mimicking, because a lot of boxing is repetition. You're sort of moving back and forth. You're jabbing. I'm not a boxer. I don't care to be a boxer. But I can see how one person would read this and say, that's fascinating. She's mimicking the movements of boxing, the pace of boxing, the sort of temperament of it, because the story is moving back and forth, telling details about the characters' pasts and their presents and their futures as this boxing match has happened. It's sort of moving back and forth in time. So I can see someone saying, this is pretty brilliant that she's doing it this way. I can also see someone saying, oh my God, stop saying the word plastic, or stop saying the characters' full names. I'm not turned off by the book. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it when I get to the end. I feel like I'm ending up somewhere in the middle. I feel like I'm that rare person who's like, I don't hate it. I don't think I'm going to love it either, though. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. I think a lot will sort of depend on the direction of the final matches and where this ends up for me. But as I said, I feel like I'm the rare person who's ending up in the middle of something that has been very cilantro. Like you either love it or you hate it. And there's very little that I've seen in the middle. And yet somehow that seems to be where I'm ending up. And I do think it is unnecessarily twisty and contorted in places, but it hasn't lost me. And I can see how a lot of people, clearly a lot of people who work for the New York Times Book Review, read that same twisty, contorted sentences and see like, oh, okay, it's working in purpose of this. And that makes it a really interesting book to read. So I'll finish it. Hopefully I'm going to finish it tonight so I can be done with it, not only in the month of September, but before we leave for Portland, and we will see. I do have a book picked out, so I do not want to travel with a book. So I have access to an e-galley, a couple of e-galleys on NetGalley. I think I know which one I'm going to read, but I'm going to wait and see what I'm in the mood for tomorrow. I'm going to make sure I have a couple downloaded, because a lot will also depend. I don't want to take a lot of stuff, so I'm hoping to take a lot of books home. So it could be sort of like when Joel and I went to Ireland and Scotland. I went with like an ebook loaded or something that I could read on my phone. And then once we got there, I picked up some books and ended up reading those along the way. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to do. So I haven't really decided what my next book will be. And I'm going to not mention what it will be or what the options are. I'm just going to sort of see what I'm in the mood for tomorrow. I have been thinking about audio and what's going to replace Desert Echoes as well. I think what I'm going to do is lean into sort of spooky season because we're going to be in October next week. And it had cooled down considerably last week. Like I had to break out some sweatshirts and some sweaters and flannels last week. And then it really heated back up and I'm back into like t-shirt weather today or this week, not just today. So because it had gotten cold and because the leaves are changing color where I live, I'm in very like fall mood. And for that reason, I'm kind of thinking I might do something a little spooky. I have an idea. So in this case, I'll tell you what the idea is. Eric LaRocca was recommended to me as a horror writer by Chelsea from Montana Book Company. And Chelsea's actually going to be in Portland. She's on the board of the organization that we are going to this event for. She's the one who recommended that we come and invited us. So she likes Eric LaRocca's horror stories. And, you know, as much as people love to comment on my videos and say that I'm very narrow-minded about the things that I like to read and I'm very closed off to other things, and here I am being a little defensive about it. It's like, I don't usually read horror, but I feel like I'm going to read a horror book. So I do think it is important to get out of your comfort zone and try other genres and things. And clearly that led me to Abby Jimenez, and it worked out really well in that case. So yeah, I should also clarify that a lot of the people who leave those comments are not people who tend to follow a lot of my videos. Like maybe they'll watch one, leave that comment, and then never watch another one. So I shouldn't take it personally, I guess is the lesson there. But anyway, so I'm probably going to do a horror book on audio. And if I don't get along with it, I'll have a backup plan. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. So that's what's been going on this week. I would love to hear what's been going on in your week, what you've been reading, watching, loving, and all of that. Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, I really appreciate your time. I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.